The Isaiah Factor Uncensored starts right now.
And welcome to The Factor Uncensored. Thank you for joining us tonight. Major news out of California. A federal judge has ruled the Trump administration violated federal law when it deployed the National Guard and active duty Marines to Los Angeles earlier this year, this summer, of course. Let's break this down and see what it all means with political analyst Dr. Dietrich von Biedenfeld and from UHD, Dr. David Branham. So this news means what to the Trump administration, Dr. Branham?
Well, they had to be prepared for this because Charles Breyer was definitely going to rule against him doing this in California. So, it's, you know, with federal judges, it's who you draw. In this case, they drew a person that was not going to rule in Trump's favor. Now, that said, you know, he's a left-winger, Trump's a right-winger. There's differences. That doesn't mean that he's wrong in his decision, but it does mean that it's going to go on to appeal. Trump will appeal it, and it could very well end up in the Supreme Court.
Now, for those who say he violated the 1878 law, and it's clear what the law states, how do you get around that?
Well, the law states that you cannot use the National Guard to enforce domestic law. That's basically what it says. You can't go in and use them as police. So how do you get around that? You have a presidential emergency. And that's the thing that's kind of out there being juggled. Is this a federal emergency where Trump can actually go past the Posse Comitatus Act and say, look, it's a federal emergency, I'm the president, I can employ the National Guard here. So that's where he's got a chance to win. And we'll see what the courts say from there.
Now, Dr. von Biedenfeld, if these states say, we didn't say this is an emergency against what the president is alleging, that this is an emergency and we need to be boots on the ground, how do you reconcile that with the courts? Will they say, look, the state said there was no emergency here, there was no need for your presence?
Absolutely, and some of this is, as Dr. Branham mentioned, there are exceptions. So there is wiggle room in how you deploy federal troops in domestic situations in the same way that you're not allowed to use the Central Intelligence Agency to spy domestically, but they might use a law enforcement partner to achieve that end. So one of the ways that the courts are going to look at this is one of the exceptions for using them would be if the governor's office of these respective states declared some sort of National Guard emergency before it moved to federalization. But in those states where the governors are saying, no, we don't declare an emergency, it's going to require the Trump administration to find very clear ways to deploy the troops without violating that sort of post-Reconstruction Act thought process and spirit of the law, where we say we don't want federal troops enforcing laws without due process, with their own uniform code of military justice, extra constitutionally on U.S. citizens. And so at this point, the Supreme Court really is in a bind, but the easy way for the Trump administration to do this is to tell their commanders to stop sending emails and messages that a court can look at that then directly violate or contravene the intent and letter of the Posse Comitatus 1878.
Now, is Chicago looking at this case closely? And is there anything at this point that Washington, D.C. can do because their presence is already there in Washington?
Well, it's different in Chicago and Washington. Washington has a home rule exception that allows Trump to go in for 30 days. That 30 days is going to be up in a while. So yes, they are looking at this. And Trump has hinted that he's going to use his emergency powers to continue what he's doing in Washington, D.C. So they're definitely looking at that. Chicago's definitely looking at this, and they're celebrating today because this is what they've been saying all along. We don't want federal troops here. We can enforce our own domestic law, and that's what the law says we can do. So are these cities looking at it? Yeah. They're going to be looking very closely, though, at these appeals. Judge Breyer has put a 10-day stay on his decision to allow these appeals to get processed. So in the coming days, we're going to have more news on this very quickly.
What is the end game here for the Trump administration? Is there really a public safety concern, or is this about politics for those who are listening tonight want to know?
The challenge is going to be distinguishing between, as Governor Newsom has mentioned in California, those states with high crime rates, high homicide rates, such as Mississippi, again, and contrasting that from democratically led states like Illinois. So when we have facts and data that show parallel patterns, but only unilateral deployment to democratically led states, it's going to be difficult to distinguish the political implications of the president's decision. At the end of the day, this does move towards a more authoritarian leaning that people have interpreted, but where Article 2 is seen in a more presidential light. We know that the president likes gilded furniture. We know that there is a move
gotta
to this
be
ballroom.
gold. It's got to be gold.
So there's a regal presence, and there's an idea that a lot of things can get done if Congress and the courts get out of the president's way, because he's all about business, he's about solving problems, and if they just get out of his way with some of these pesky rules, he can solve things for the American public.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on The Factor Uncensored. We appreciate your expertise.